They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there.
We don't need to go populist left or populist right. We don't need to embrace neo-Marxism or neo-fascism, these disastrous movements from the 20th century. Turns out the answer is pretty much our Bill of Rights, our story. Embrace freedom. That's the answer.
And if the LP has a purpose, it's not to put people to sleep. It's to wake them up.
We're here because we love liberty, and we're here because we hate injustice. We are here to save mankind. We are here to fight.
Join us, the Libertarian Party, in perhaps the most exciting, grandest endeavor in history, the restoration of American liberty.
Ideas spread, they can't stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.
Hello and welcome to episode 81 of Decentralized Revolution, a podcast from the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus and Mises PAC. I'm Aaron Harris, and I'm your host. Today's guest is someone I've been wanting to have on for a long time, and you know how it goes. Sometimes you just kind of forget. There were a couple of missed connections with this person a couple of months ago, maybe a little longer than that. And I was reminded again that we needed to have him on when he appeared at the Take Human Action Bash out in Reno at the Libertarian National Convention. And of course, I'm speaking about Daniel McAdams. He was the sort of the first speaker that Scott Horton, MC Scott Horton, introduced that night. And he really set the tone for the night. Just really, he didn't pull any punches, and he spoke about the need for us to call things what they are, and the problem that we face, which is an empire that's out of control and a media and just sort of general ruling class that pretends that something else is happening. So speaking truth to power is necessary, and we do a lot of that in today's episode. We talk about, of course, Ukraine, and a little bit of the background in that. He has a background in Eastern Europe and Eastern European policy. And we just talk about what it's like to try to get news in this environment, and how to, what it's like to try to comment on the news given tech deplatforming and things like that. Of course, Daniel is the executive director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, which, in his retirement, Dr. Paul, does more than most of us in our, 20s, 30s, and 40s. He's hosting, along with Daniel McAdams, the Ron Paul Liberty Report, which is on, I think it's still on YouTube every day. And Daniel has a little bit of news about that, which we'll hear. And it's just a pleasure to have on Daniel McAdams. I really want to thank you for coming on. I've wanted to have you on for quite a while, and it just hasn't happened. And then last time, about 10 days ago, we were meant to do this, and we had like the biggest thunderstorm of the year here in Knoxville. So I really appreciate you accommodating me on the reschedule. And I also really want to thank you for your part in us having Dr. Paul and yourself, among others, as guests at our Take Human Action Bash in Reno. That was a really special moment. I want to thank you for making that happen.
Well, thanks a lot, Aaron. That was a real blast, wasn't it? That was a really neat event, I have to say.
Yeah, you kicked it off for us. You threw some heat there, coming out as our introductory speaker. And Scott Horton, of course, emceed the event. And I've often thought I'm a big baseball fan, and people get tired of my baseball analogies, but I look at you and Scott as like the Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig of libertarian foreign policy. I'll let you guys fight to see who's Babe Ruth, but I really
He's
appreciate.
a fat guy that drinks too much, right? So, well, I don't want to incriminate myself. So.
But he was the better player and the older player, so maybe it does fit. But I really enjoy the work you've done over the years, and I really think that the last couple of years or so, of course, it's always been true, but there's a lot going on in foreign policy right now, which has kind of been overshadowed a little bit by the COVID stuff. But I actually see some connections there. And I just kind of want to get your take on what you and Dr. Paul have been at the Institute for Peace and Prosperity, what you guys have been working on, and what's the big story in your mind for libertarians foreign policy-wise right now that we should be talking about?
Well, you're right to start off by saying that there was a connection between COVID and current foreign policy. And you know, a big connection between the two is manipulation, media manipulation, the government's infiltration and use of social media to maintain narratives at all costs. That's a big one. There was a piece, I think it was on Mint Press News today, that came out, Alan McLeod, about how many, quote, former CIA and FBI guys have been hired by Facebook and other social media to moderate content, i.e. to block people like us and like the LP Mises caucus from getting it out. So, you know, in that sense, there was a real connection between the two, which is we will maintain the narrative, and if you cross the line, you disappear, you go to the digital gulag. So I think that's an important connection. But obviously the biggest foreign policy issue right now and the most contentious, and also the one way you can really determine the Beltway types versus the rest of America for the most part is Ukraine. I mean, we have pumped $40 billion. A total of $60 billion was given to Ukraine since February 24th. As I mentioned, I think in Reno, that's a half of the whole GDP of the country in 2021. So we basically wrote a check for half the country. Hey, you know, can we buy this? And we bought it. It's a sinkhole of money. It's a massive money laundering scheme, international money laundering scheme. But even worse than that, the cherry on top is a nuclear war.
Yeah.
So, right. So you know, that's the big thing. And of course, it's just like anything else. If you say anything about forced masking and forced vaccine, you just love the virus and you want people to die. If you say anything about the fact that there's a lot more than meets the eye on the Ukraine situation, well, then you're obviously in the pay of Putin, because nobody can have an original thought outside the accepted wisdom of the neocons and the left neocons in DC and the media that props them up.
Yeah. I think we've seen in my lifetime, I am old enough to remember, you know, the last few years of the Cold War. And I want to get your take. Like, was it always this way as far as sort of the regime wanting to maintain the narrative at all costs, but maybe we just didn't see it and feel it as much, you know, when we were younger? You know, we had Peter Jennings, Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, New York Times, that was basically it. And now with social media, are we just able to pick up more on these, you know, they're losing control of the narrative and we see the clampdown? Has there always been this, you know, orchestrated, we don't really want the American people to understand the dynamics of what's happening?
And that's a great question. And it's one that I ponder because it's, you know, like Rumsfeld and the unknown unknowns, or the known unknowns, whatever the hell he used to say. It kind of made sense. We don't know what we didn't know back then, because there really was only one way to get the news, and you were an NBC guy or an ABC guy or a CBS guy, maybe even a CNN guy later on, right?
Yeah.
But it all came up, and it was all stovepipe up the same place into your home, into your brain. And if you wanted, especially before the internet, if you wanted to follow alternative sources, well, then they came in the mail, in a brown paper wrapper or something. You subscribe to something from the Mises Institute or from FEE or from someone like that, Future Freedom Foundation. But now we all have a voice, for the most part, or we have a bigger voice. And it's been an enormous boost for organizations like both of our organizations that are swimming against the tide and without huge budgets. But the downside, of course, yeah, you're right, is the attempted limitation that basically the cat's out of the bag and they're trying to put him back into the bag, right?
Yeah. How has that worked with you all, with you and Dr. Paul? Seems like I remember a few months ago, maybe you guys got a strike on YouTube or something. Like, what has happened to you, and how does that affect how you decide what to cover and talk about? That's got to be, I remember back in my constitutional law classes, again, way back, that, this concept of the chilling effect. It's like, well, the law itself may not do as much to actually clamp down on things, but if you have this in place, it's in the back of the mind of the journalists and the publishers and now the commentators on the internet, that that's, to me, that's a very effective way to shape the debate, because you're wondering, oh, well, am I going to get away with this? So how have you guys navigated this over the past couple of years?
You're right. It's a classic hallmark of totalitarianism, where you have the laws on the books and they're selectively enforced based on your political outlook, based on whether you're with the inner party or the outer party or outside the party, and you see a lot of that. Now, I'd like to say that through COVID, we did a daily show on YouTube. I would like to say that I never paused for a moment before we went on to be careful about what I said, but I'd be lying. I did do that. I was careful. Now, Dr. Paul is a different animal, right? And so sometimes he'd say stuff that would make me really nervous, but he's incapable of self-censorship, which is a good thing. It's a wonderful thing. I mean, it shows that he has the true freedom spirit, but I'm, on the other hand, panicking over there and worrying about it. And I hated worrying about it. And I remembered because, I studied a lot about the communist era, and I lived in Hungary right after communism fell. And so there was a real hangover in terms of social discourse and social interaction and even political structures. Even though they were free, there was still that hangover of communism, totalitarianism. And so I remembered it, and I hated the fact that I was worried about what I said in a free country. But there you have it. Yeah. I mean, I was worried, and thankfully now we have some alternatives. And there are other media companies. In fact, some of them are very friendly to us, and we intend to focus more on interacting with those companies. In fact, we'll have an announcement soon. This is a news that hasn't been anywhere else, but we'll have an announcement soon that we're going to move the show primarily to a different platform.
Oh, great.
So yeah, that's going to be a real interesting thing for us, and it's going to be a real, it's going to be a real boost for us, I think.
Yeah, I do want to jump into Ukraine and kind of get the not only your back analysis of things, but what's going on right now. But and this is a question I like to ask, our libertarian thinkers who are looking at things and who want to know what's going on in current events so that you can then analyze it. Where do you go for your news? And I would imagine it's probably a process of, you have to go to more than one source, but what are the sources you go to who are right, and what are and not politically, but just correct? And where do you go to kind of get the official narrative so you can kind of do that cross-checking?
It's really difficult, and for me, I mean, it's like a dog's breakfast out there. You got to sift through everything and see what what sticks. I probably, because I'm obsessed with it, because I realize how high the stakes are, and I also realize how many voices are against the view that I hold, including a lot of libertarian voices, which we could get into later. I feel like I have to spend more time than anyone else, and I do spend an inordinate amount of time reading. But I do follow, as you say, it's kind of the mainstream, the pro-Ukraine voices, and that's pretty easy to find. And a lot of the Russian side has been banned from Twitter. So on Twitter, you'll see the Ukraine side, and so we can look through the different accounts there. But I've found that I've gone to Telegram, which I resisted just because I'm a Luddite, right? And I hate I hate new things. I hate change. But
having to learn a new platform and how do you work this?
No,
yeah, I'm the same way.
I'm like a boomer, right? This thing doesn't have the internet,
right?
But no, I was forced to learn it, and I follow some pro-Russian ones there, so I can see that side. And despite what the other side will say, it's pretty easy to spot propaganda on both sides, and the Russians do propaganda, and the Ukrainians do propaganda, and the Americans do propaganda, and intelligent people can sift it all together and try to find the truth out without the help of the CIA agents who are within Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere. Imagine that. We can actually think for ourselves. But that's a long answer to a short question. There is no one place. I like Zero Hedge because it's cheeky. It reaches out to a lot of places, and it kind of reminds me maybe of how I felt about Drudge maybe 15 or 20 years ago, when it was kind of edgy and it sought out unusual sources and it kind of put together a narrative. Obviously, it's not like that anymore. So I definitely, when I get up in the morning, in order, I'll click Hedge, then I'll look at what Anti-War has up. And I agree with most of the things, not everything that they publish, but most of the things they publish. And then I'll look on Lou Rockwell's site, and that's kind of my morning. I may hit Drudge to see what they're saying over there, but taking it with a grain of salt. And then I go, to all the accounts I follow elsewhere to try to get, just try to suck it all in. Like one of those big whales that have those, what are they called, baleen? And they just saw like all the krill just come through there. That's how I feel.
Are the corporate media sources in like what I guess we would call, again, back in the Cold War, non-aligned countries? Are there any good sources out there, or is the corporate press kind of the corporate press no matter what country they're from?
That's a good question. And one of the things that's interesting, and this is something you can really dig into, is how many of the independent media sources overseas are funded by the U.S. government. And it's easy to see how that happens because all you have to do is look on USAID's website. I don't know if they still openly list it, but they used to, or National Endowment for Democracy, and look for grants that they give to independent media, right? And here in the U.S., if the U.S. government gave you a grant, like they gave your podcast a grant as an independent media outlet, obviously at that point you're not an independent media outlet, right? You're not a little bit pregnant. You're pregnant or you're not. And so, but a lot of the media for the last, since the end of the Cold War, 30 years, has been subsidized by the U.S. government, and especially like places like Hungary, where Viktor Orban, he's off the rails. He's not paying. He's not doing what he's told to do. He's following a relatively independent policy. He's coloring outside the lines a little bit. And I wrote about this a couple of years ago on our website. The U.S. decided to step in and start funding independent media in Hungary. And you see a lot in Poland. We ran a piece by a great Polish analyst who talked about how the opposition in Poland is coming from the political right now, the opposition to the warmongering, but how it's difficult to get through because academia, higher education, and the media are all subsidized by governments, and the U.S. government in particular.
So let's get into Ukraine. And as libertarians, we hate war. It's my number one most important issue. Strangely enough, it's not defending, big business like the sort of the caricature of us in academia is. And so we're sometimes, and you and Dr. Paul, maybe more than anybody, I hear this criticism a lot. It's like, oh, well, I thought libertarians were anti-war, and here they are defending Putin. And we don't have to necessarily go into the motivations behind it. We've kind of addressed that a little bit, but like, how do we sort out, like, again, war is bad. And in a situation like this, how do we get across the notion to people that this is not what it seems on the surface, as it's presented as, history started 18 months ago, and Putin did X and Y, and it's a clear case of he's totally in the wrong. How do we communicate that more nuanced, like, hey, in some of these things, like, there's no good guy, So when you come across somebody, maybe what would be your cocktail party spiel explaining Ukraine from an anti-war libertarian perspective to someone?
Well, it's not, and there's no easy answer. I mean, every month I get a box delivered to my door full of vodka. So obviously, whenever I'm on an interview, I just take the pro-Putin line. It's
Right.
very simple, because I'm not free, but I'm cheap, right? And that's what they think. I mean, how do you convince people that Saddam was not ripping babies from incubators, right? It's all bullshit. All war propaganda is lies. It's always based on lies. And if that's your default, then that's fine. You don't have to get any further deep. You don't have to get any deeper. Everything the government says, everything government funded think tanks directly or indirectly write about the whole situation is a lie. And if that's your default, then maybe you can find some truth. And for Americans, if you're opposed to war, if you're anti-war, then oppose the U.S. empire. It's that simple. That's something we can actually do something about, right? And if anyone thinks that Vladimir Putin woke up one morning on February 24th in the morning and said, you know what, I am in such a bad mood, I am so PO'd at the world, you know what, let's start bombing Ukraine. If that's the level of your intelligence and sophistication, then maybe you shouldn't think about foreign policy at all, because maybe it's beyond your intellectual reach, right?
Yep.
So there's not much you can do about people who think that way. But people who are opposed to war, we just passed Congress, the House just passed a nearly $900 billion military bill. That bill is not to protect the United States. That's a money laundering bill. That's the way you keep people who are well-connected rich off the backs of the rest of America and off the blood of people in places like Syria and Libya and Ukraine and elsewhere. That's how you get it done. So if you are opposed to war, you can do something about it by opposing the U.S. empire, by opposing $1 trillion a year for a war machine that does nothing to keep us safe. And in fact, has gotten us closer to World War III than at any time in history, including, as I mentioned, in Reno, including the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I think that you're right in that, we have to, I'm trying to put this the right way. Anytime you try to be empathetic toward bad guys, people, accuse you of being, on their side, but like, to explain is not to excuse. And so, like, I think it's important to remember that, like, Putin and the Russian regime, they, again, are bad guys, but they don't act irrationally. They act, for the most part, in what they think is their best interest. And how in the world could it be in their best interest to pick a fight with the United States regime, who has as many nuclear missiles as they have, give or take 500 or whatever it is? Of course, he has a reason for doing what he's doing. It may not be a good reason, and his means may be bad. And I agree very much so with that second statement. But why did he do it? Why did he get into this? We're criticizing our regime for getting into this because of the threat of nuclear war. Why would he take that same step to get into this boxing ring where the consequences are so potentially dire?
Well, here's where the virus of the Wolfowitz doctrine even infects libertarians, and it's a real shame. The idea that only the United States is entitled to having national interests, right? Mm-hmm. Everything we do is to promote democracy. Everything anyone else does that is not what we tell them to do is the result of totalitarianism, the result of viciousness, the result of warmongering, right? So there's this view that no one else is allowed to have in America a national interest, only us, because we're the only forces for good in the world. And that's just simply not true. Again, anyone who believes that is probably not sophisticated enough to understand the world. All you have to do is look in places like Iraq, where 1 million people died based on lies, right? If the shoe were on the other foot, and what was being done to us via Mexico or Canada, it's not hard to make the analogies. Does anybody think the United States would not have attacked with more force, with shock and awe, with Fallujah type force? Does anyone think America would not have done the same thing? We did the same thing to Libya, which not only did nothing to us, but couldn't have done anything to us.
Yep.
Ditto Syria, ditto Iraq, ditto Serbia 3 times, and so on and so on and so on. So the idea that all of these things occur in a vacuum, and that only other actors who do things that we would do and have done in spades, they're the wrong ones and we're always in the right. That's a real problem, and it's a real problem among a lot of libertarians who can't see this. They can only see it, and I'm criticizing some of them, but if you only see it as a bumper sticker mentality, then you're missing the point, right? You're missing the point. You've got to go a little bit deeper in the understanding of this. Okay, we don't like the fact that Putin has blown the hell out of the Ukrainian army. Yeah, it's not a nice thing, especially if you're in the Ukrainian army. But you can't ignore the last 8 years, starting with the U.S.-led coup in 2014. You can go back to the U.S. coup in 2004. We've overthrown that government at least twice now, and put in our own puppets. And from 14 until February 24th, not only the U.S., but the entirety of NATO armed and trained to the hilt the Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian military, among the best armed and best trained by NATO countries in Europe, right? And not only armed and trained them, we saw this from, I think it was in early February, something came out in the New York Times saying that the U.S. is training specifically how to fight Russia. So you spend 8 years doing this, and if you look at the OSCE reports a week before the Russians attacked, there was a 200% increase in shelling from the Ukraine side to the Donbass side, right? So you have no, we won't say no to NATO for Ukraine. No, we won't back off. And yes, we are giving the weapons that are shelling and increasing shelling. And you have a tripwire that's been triggered, and you have a response. And it's a response you'd see anywhere in the world. So do I like it? No. I think it's terrible, and I get sick when I see what's happened there. But who's at fault, really? Well, Washington and Brussels is at fault, really.
Yeah. So why exactly are they at fault without, and go back as far as you want to, but I'm not asking for like the, starting with the czars and all that. But like, is it in dispute in sort of the, again, regime approved sources? Are they still pretending that those U.S. backed coups didn't happen? Like what actually happened over the last, say, 20 years or so? And have any of those things been acknowledged in the mainstream debate?
Well, anyone can watch the Kathy Young Scott Horton debate and see how that worked out, because Kathy Young tried to say Victoria Nuland was not planning a coup in Ukraine. That was just chit chat, right?
Right.
F the EU. We want this guy in this position. No, that guy's going to sit it out. And over here, we're going to put this guy here. No, that was just idle chit chat, right?
Right.
So yeah, they do try to say that it wasn't that, but they're lying, and they always lie. Again, it goes back to the beginning. But I'm the furthest thing from a like a militant flag waving, pro-American nationalist. But if for example, some jihad crazy country was training in Mexico to kill the United States, to invade the United States, and they had some pretty big firepower, I think I'd take notice too, as would anyone. So, it happens. And the way the U.S. empire has behaved over the past 20 years, the license was given with 9/11 that we're going to blow the whole damn world up if we need to make all of you just like us.
Yeah.
Because the only way we'll have peace is, either the piece of the grave or you become just like us. And the rest of the world said, you know what, we don't want to be just like you. And that's why we've had such mass murder across the globe, and why we've flushed how many trillions of dollars down the toilet in this fool's errand of transforming the world to be just like us.
Yeah. One of the biggest names, and I just hope that someday I live long enough to see, history sort of get this right. But I think that, again, if there are objective historians 30 years from now or 50 years from now, I think they're going to look back, and the real story of Ukraine and U.S. domestic politics, to me, it's so fascinating, and there's so much more there than I know about. I haven't done tons of research into this, but like, Trump, one of the impeachments was over, arms to Ukraine. The current president, assuming he's still breathing, I don't know, it's July 15th. But of course, Joe Biden is one of the biggest names involved with Ukraine over the last 20 years, and all the Hunter Biden stuff. Like, it's amazing to me that the American people don't put this together, and that there's not a single journalist or publisher somewhere who would want to start to try to connect the dots on this stuff. Like, it seems so obvious to me that there's so much going on there, and that the American people and American journalists seem just so not. I don't even think that they are even not curious about it. I just don't even think they conceptualize it, that, Trump and impeachment and Russiagate is over here, and somehow this current Ukraine thing is some totally separate issue. But it seems obvious that it's all connected, right? Like, it's bizarre that this is like the biggest foreign policy story, since 9/11 in Iraq, and it's not even a story, right?
Well, it's the biggest scam in history. I mean, if you look at who owns the media companies, they're always tied to the military industrial complex. GE owns this network and what have you. It's all owned by these companies that are making trillions of dollars from this. So it's no surprise that they're framing the issue to their advantage. That's what they do. They don't feel any kind of moral obligation to objectively, research the truth. They have no interest in doing that. So they report that which benefits them. And that's what we're seeing here. It's a massive, massive scam, and it's on the back of the American people. But I do think that Americans are waking up, and they do understand. And even though the preponderance of information war is stacked against them, I still do think they are seeing through some of the BS.
Mm-hmm. Well, talk about Joe Biden's role in Ukraine from the Obama administration up until now, and did any of that have lead to the war? Anything? What did the Obama administration, besides those, the 2014 coup, do you think they actually tried to make this war happen, or did they just pursue their goals and like, oops, or, and specifically, I kind of want to know where Joe Biden was in all this, because I get the impression that 10 years or so ago, he was more, compos mentis, I guess, and may have actually been making some decisions about Ukraine.
Well, Ukraine was his baby. I mean, 100%. And in fact, the team that he has assembled now, this is the culmination of what they had started. I mean, to the person. Victoria Nuland, she botched the whole thing. She brought death and destruction to Ukraine, and she's gotten a raise. I mean, she's in a far more important position than she was. Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken, all of these people were intimately involved in the coup in 2014, and now they've come back after the evil Trump spent 4 years. Remember, you're right. One of the impeachment issues, they dragged this guy Vindman, who's Ukrainian background and obviously a hyper partisan. And what did he say in the trial? Well, when Trump said that maybe we should dial back our aggression toward Russia via arming Ukraine, well, that went against the interagency consensus. What the hell is he talking about? I mean, I'm not a big fan of executive power, and there's been so much overreach. But this is one area where the president does have a legitimate role in shaping and making U.S. foreign policy. Now, he's subject to the checks and balances. He's subject to the power of the purse in Congress. But he does have broad authority when it comes to changing U.S. foreign policy. And that's what Trump was, in his own, heavy-handed, however you want to say, inept way, by putting the worst possible people in charge of doing it.
Yeah.
But he still nevertheless stepped on their toes, and they were going to have none. The interagency was going to have none of that, right?
Yeah. But there's no such thing as the deep state, right?
No,
that's a conspiracy theory.
That's Alex Jones, man.
So what's going on right now? I've heard Scott Horton say a few times that you want to talk about an impeachable offense like Biden's, either inability, or I think it's an outright refusal to even like negotiate to try to end this thing. Like, is it we're just at a stalemate and we're just going to keep doing this? And the Raytheon and Lockheed, I even forget what they're all called now, but Northrop Grumman, are they just going to keep selling bombs and we're just going to do this for another few months? And is there an end to this? Has the dynamic of like who's winning and all that, where are we at now? How many, 4 or 5 months after this started?
Well, Ukraine right now wants 300-kilometer distance HIMARS ammunition. If they get that, they will be able to, and they will shoot pretty deep into Russia, and that'll start World War III. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just simple. I mean, Russia, and you can talk to Colonel McGregor about this because he knows far better than I do the military aspect. I'm not schooled in military tactics, but essentially Russia will take out launchers in Western Europe. Mm-hmm. That's what's going to happen. So yeah, we're very, 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 very close to a very serious thing. And the problem is the people in the administration don't believe it. They believe that Russia's blinking. It doesn't matter if you love Putin or hate him. They believe he's blinking. He's not blinking. He's doing what he said he would do. People with better military minds than ours, better military minds than people in the media, people like Scott Ritter and Doug McGregor said that the initial push toward Kiev was a feint, classic feint, to tie down the reinforcements, and it seems to have worked. They control 20% of the country. I was just reading something. I won't say who wrote it, but they said, given Russia's inept performance thus far, they captured 20% of the country. Right? Like, what the hell?
Right.
And they're at a 3-to-1 disadvantage. Usually when you attack, you have to have a 3-to-1 advantage. They were at a 3-to-1 disadvantage in personnel, and they captured 20% of the country. I mean, when you're winning, you don't negotiate. Russia was ready to negotiate. When they were talking about the talks in Ankara, that was the last opportunity for a negotiated settlement. And Kiev was very, very stupid. They probably were on the hook. Who knows what Washington and Brussels and London had on Zelensky. My guess, knowing a little bit about his past, they had plenty on him. Yeah. Right?
He seems very obviously he's not in charge, right? Like he seems like he was definitely put there by somebody, I think.
Yeah, let's put it that way. But that was the last chance for negotiation. There's no negotiation now. Russia's winning and will continue to win, whether you like it or not. We can sit here and say, by golly, I wish they weren't, but they are winning, and they'll go as far as they can until the U.S. does something stupid, or the ridiculous, absurd Lithuanians do something stupid and get blown out of the water.
I want to go back to something you said, that Ukraine is trying to get some, I think you said 300-kilometer range weapons.
Yeah. So
explain, like, what is that contingent on? Are they trying to get it from us or get our permission? Is that going to happen?
I mean,
where is that?
We gave them the launchers with but the ammunition right now has a limit of 70 kilometers. And they're using them. It's probably the most effective. Again, I'm not an expert. From what I've seen, they're probably the most effective equipment that the U.S. has provided thus far. Although the Ukrainians keep firing them into civilian neighborhoods, which is not very nice. But when Russia has warned, Medvedev, who is the head of their National Security Council, former president, said, we will take out decision-making centers He didn't say in Ukraine. He said, we will take out decision-making centers if these weapons are used to strike within Russia. There's no reason to believe they're bluffing because they haven't bluffed thus far. And we have to ask ourselves, and we actually have an article up on our website, Pat Buchanan wrote, and he made a very good point. Even in the height of the Cold War, even when Moscow moved into Budapest in 1956, cooler heads prevailed, saying this is not worth World War III, even though we see the Soviet threat, all of the stuff, everything that was happening then, the threat of worldwide communism, right? Even then, they said, nah. 68 in Czechoslovakia, nah. 81 in Poland with solidarity, nah. These are pretty bad things, but it's not worth a nuclear war. So how the hell is it possible in the year 2022, when there's no global communism, there's no totalitarian threat anywhere, the Russians aren't breathing down our necks, and why now, of all times, do we feel it's a good idea to get right up and feel the hot breath of nuclear war on the backs of our necks? You know, if we just pause and think about that for a second, considering what's happened in the last 50 to 60 years, you know, you have to say, what is wrong with people?
Well, how would you answer that other than, like, it can't simply be that I don't think that the top level people making decisions actually believe hey, we're just spreading democracy and we're the good guys. I mean, they're in their minds, they're playing a real life game of Risk and they want to win this game. Like, what are they trying to accomplish? And are they trying to get a wider war that could go nuclear, or what do you think they're actually trying to do? Not what they say, but what are they actually trying to make happen at this moment?
Well, it's a continuation of the Brzezinski plan from the late 70s and 80s. You know, Brzezinski said, I got a great idea. Let's create this people called Al-Qaeda and give them a bunch of weapons, because by doing that, we'll suck the Soviet Union into its own Vietnam. And there's the quote from the biography of him where it says, I'm not going to get uptight about some jazzed up Muslims. Who cares about them?
Right.
And then we know what happened about that. This is a continuation of the idea that we are going to give Russia its Vietnam. We're going to cripple their economy, destroy their military, and have a regime change and go back to that wonderful, jolly Yeltsin era. Well, it hasn't worked out that way, and even the biggest skeptics are recognizing that the ruble is not rubble, as Joe Biden promised, and in fact, Russia is doing quite well, and the rest of the world has, by and large, broken away. We don't have a massive coalition of the willing. The global South has said, no, we're tired of playing this game.
Yeah.
Let us off, and they have gotten off. So yes, the idea is regime change for Russia, and it's not going to work. So whether you want it or not, it's the reality.
So is their goal just simply I remember a little bit of the Harvard boys thing, like the whole thing of them wanting to just cripple their economy and to try to, is it just economic imperialism? The bankers want to get that. I almost look at it as like drug corners in Baltimore or Chicago, right? Like they just want that corner to do business on. Is that it?
Well, there's a great book called The Demon in Democracy, Totalitarian Temptations in Free Societies, and it's by a Polish professor, and I highly recommend the book. There's the idea that you can't have one country anywhere. It's not an economic imperialism, although it's partly economic, but it's a systemic imperialism, that there can't be any country outside this sort of rules-based international order. Mm-hmm. The rules, of course, being made by us. And they don't have to be consistent, and they don't apply to us, only to you.
Yeah.
And so again, when countries in a minor way color outside the lines, like Hungary has done, particularly with regard to accepting refugees, then they feel the brunt of the rules-based economic order. Yeah. And that's the idea. And it's ironically, as the professor points out, it is a mirror image of Soviet communist imperialism that wanted to have a worldwide communist revolution. We want the same kind of worldwide revolution, and we can't tolerate any system that's different than we think it should be. And that's a real problem, and that's where non-interventionism comes in, and that's why I try to bring it home to where you may not approve of what your neighbor is doing, or the way he lives, or whether he eats something you disapprove of, or goes to a church you don't like. But as long as he's not shooting at you, you leave him alone.
Mm-hmm.
And if we had followed that, we never, of course, would have attacked Libya and Syria and Iraq, Iran in '53. We certainly wouldn't have armed Ukraine because it doesn't mean anything to us. We wouldn't have the problems in Russia. So that's why non-interventionism is the simplest solution to all of these dangerous impulses.
Yeah. If only the American people had a chance to vote for someone for president who espoused those views sometime in the last 20 years.
Yeah, and nobody ran who said that, you know.
So we got just a few minutes left, and I've really enjoyed this. That one of the big things, again, kind of looking at it from their perspective, again, the global elite, that the big thing we haven't mentioned yet is China. And if I'm the democratic rules-based order people, like, it seems to me that they don't seem to have an idea of how to deal with China other than to just try to do business with them. And so where does China fit into all this? It seems to me that they're spending their time, again, on a much less profitable corner in Russia, where they should be looking at China. And I have a personal interest in China. And anytime I get a foreign policy guy on here, I always ask him, because my mother-in-law is in Taiwan. I want to eventually have like a winter home in Taiwan. Like, I love that. It's such a great country. And of course, it's a pawn on this game of risk. So where is the democratic New World Order and China at the moment? And do they have any idea what they want to do? And what is China's goal too? Let's talk just a few minutes on that before we say goodbye.
Well, the sad thing is that the neocons and neolibs in Washington are making China more likely to have an aggressive view toward Taiwan. You know, obviously, we know the problems, we know the situation, we know the history. It has been nuanced by smart people, smart-ish people in Washington for the past, since Nixon went to China. It's been nuanced. It hasn't been perfect, but it's been nuanced. But now China is seeing the U.S. blowing the rules out of the water in Russia, Ukraine, and they're thinking, you know what, we better grab it now, or certainly there are strains thinking, it's not going to get any easier. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if the U.S. starts arming Taiwan, we're going to view it as a threat. So ironically, the fact that smart people are all gone and people that are, I don't even know the word for it, are involved, makes it a lot more dangerous for people on all sides. I've never believed, and I still don't believe, that China has imperial military ambitions. They would have shown them by now. They're pretty damn good at business.
Yeah, they want to do business. They want to make money.
I forget I wish I could remember who the world leader was. I think it was someone in Africa, and I just don't have everything at my fingertips. But they said, every time the American government comes to talk to us, they talk and warn us about China and how we've got to, and every time the Chinese come, they bring business deals, So we go down there and give a bunch of lectures. The Chinese go and they do business deals. And I have no doubt that the Chinese are ruthless when it comes to business. And I'm sure they extract their pound of flesh wherever they can.
Yeah.
But, it's ironic in many ways. And I've been to China, I spent a little bit of time in China. And of course, when I worked for Dr. Paul for all those years, I spent a lot of time interacting with officials from the Chinese government. I don't have any illusions about China, but it's sort of ironic that they're better business people than we are. They're better capitalists than America is. Right. And they've learned all about that. And of course, in the U.S., for all the China bashing, we import all the worst things about China. The de facto social credit system that everyone seems to be in love with here, and it made its debut during COVID, right? Yep. So we take all the crappy things that China does, and we ignore the good stuff they do, which is, we don't need a global military empire. Let's just do business,
So what is like the Biden administration and Western Europe? What are they? How are they looking at China, and what do you think their goal over the next 20 years is in in dealing with China? Do they have any strategy at all?
Well, again, the wise people are gone. People like Chaz Freeman, people who know the area, who are schooled, who speak languages. They're gone. So you don't have that. But what you have, I think, a great example is what we're seeing now with Russia. Essentially, when Russia attacked Ukraine, Washington kicked China between the legs and said, "Don't you dare buy anything from Russia." And China said, "Oh yeah, you're not going to insult us. We're going to do business with with Russia," and they did, and so did India, which was a big shock to the U.S. So it's a wake-up call for people who think that the U.S. can push the rest of the world around and tell it what to do, because the rest of the world has gotten tired of it. And I think we're seeing the very beginning of an absolute economic collapse, certainly in Western Europe, but probably the contagion will spread to the U.S. And part of that is because the rest of the world has said enough. We're tired of being bossed around. The unilateral moment has passed. It didn't have to pass this way, unfortunately, but it has, and I think that's where we're headed. We're headed into some dangerous territory, and that's why libertarians, non-interventionists, people who want the government to be, very, very small, this is our moment, and we have to rise to the occasion, and we have to make the case for liberty. And it should be easier than it seems to be, but nevertheless, we have to find our voice.
Well, let's make that the final question then. As libertarians, and I don't want to name the guy because I just don't want to get into that right now, but say a prominent person in the libertarian world said something in Reno and about, we really need to appeal to, the American electorate and all that. And I think that, appealing to 100 million voters, you have to water down your message, and you're not going to get anywhere. And you get what we've gotten from the Libertarian Party to a certain extent, a kind of a blunted effect in the national debate over the last several years. How do we as libertarians, what is our voice in this, and who do we talk to, and what do we say?
I think, again, I turn to Ron Paul because he's great in this. He said, you never compromise the philosophy and the message, because the philosophy and the message are great. They don't need to be watered down. The only challenge we have is to find a way to explain it in a way that people understand. And that's why when we talk Ukraine, for example, it's difficult to talk it in a philosophical way. And it's not because people are stupid. It's just because it's kind of a hard pill to swallow. I always try to approach it from an economic perspective. Your government, you can't, just for example, we did a show, I think it was on Thursday, and we all know what a nightmare healthcare is in the US. Whatever even progressives agree with us on this. We have different solutions. But in a country where healthcare is an absolute disaster, Biden is sending $1.7 billion to pay healthcare workers in Ukraine. And I think that resonates with people. And if you get them on board, I know the way I came to the libertarian worldview is I was anti-war. I was living near the Balkans, and I knew what the U.S. was doing was wrong. And that's how I stumbled upon Justin Raimondo. And then I stumbled on Lou Rockwell. And then I stumbled on this guy called Ron Paul. And it was like an explosion, 1999, 98, 97. And that's how it'll happen. So you just kind of you got to throw out the line with a little bait on it. Yeah. You don't water down the message at all. America is ready for this. We just have to be better messengers, I think.
Yeah. Well, I want you to give our regards to Dr. Paul again. That was a very special moment for all of us. And we don't have to tell the whole story here, but you enabled me to get a picture with him, which really meant a lot to me. And he just has inspired so many people. And that's what we're doing with the Mises Caucus, is we're trying to stay true to that message, to give people, to take it local, to enable people to see how liberty works at that level too. But I think our message at the so-called air campaign, to use military metaphors, since we're Americans, so we have to use military metaphors. But that top level message has to be, the pure message, and we take our inspiration from Dr. Paul, and just all thanks to you for what you've meant to his career the last decade or so, at least. And we really appreciate it, and we look forward to hopefully having you at events in the future. And I know we all keep up with what you guys are doing, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
You too. I mean, I just would say I think that the 2024 is going to be a great electoral cycle for the LP. It's an absolutely fantastic opportunity, and any way I can help to magnify and amplify the message from my area of expertise, I'm more than happy to do, because I'm very, very excited and very pro what's happened to the party.
Well, that's really heartening to hear, and I thank you for your time. And we won't we'll talk again soon. Okay.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, Aaron.
And there you have it. I'd like to thank Daniel McAdams for his time and wisdom and his forbearance with scheduling. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, I meant to have him on, but there was a big thunderstorm here in Knoxville, like literally 20 minutes before I was supposed to connect with him. And we had to postpone. So that's kind of why this is later than I wanted. But I really love the fact that he's a fellow traveler and someone that we can fight for liberty with. All the several things that we talked about are going to be up at the show notes page, decentralizedrevolution.com/81. Thanks to Dave versus Goliath for all the music you hear on Decentralized Revolution. And of course, thanks to everyone who subscribes to our email list and gives to Mises PAC at takehumanaction.com. And y'all need to go share, rate, review, and subscribe to Decentralized Revolution on your podcatcher, on YouTube, Facebook, things like that. We need your help on that. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.